Nope.
I'm writing this as a warning. A cautionary tale for anyone with a tendency to lurk around the darker parts of the World Wide Web, or perhaps those who ever find themselves getting a random moment of curiosity. If you're the type of person who finds himself on shady websites or image boards such as the notorious 4chan, please do not take what I'm sharing with you for granted. I was like you. I wanted to bust the myths of all those nefarious stories that circulated horror sites and creepypasta threads. And at first they all turned out to be just that, stories. Stories that people made up, believed, and shared in an attempt to rile up fear in those who came across them. All that changed when I came across a single image file titled Hag.jpg. I was bored, at home, on a weeknight, doing what I usually do before knocking out, browsing 4chan's X subcategory. As I sifted through the same old tired threads I had already seen countless times, I finally stumbled across something new. The caption simply read, "Can't sleep," with several replies beneath it. I assumed the replies were made by the thread's OP because every single one had the same concise nature as the one before it. They were all short and cryptic statements such as, "so sorry," and "no more." I assumed the average person would have been unsettled by this display of what I was sure to be stage psychosis. I really wish I hadn't been so jaded to the fear that accompanies these type of things. Part of me now believes that exact fear is something instilled in us humans through centuries of evolution. A vital and natural reaction we have when our instinct is telling us to back the hell away from whatever may set it off. Unfortunately, after indulging in horror for so long, I had numbed that element of my mind. I proceeded to delve into the thread. The only post that contained an image was the first. It was tiny, about the size of a thumbnail or even an icon. Above it in blue had the name of the file, Hag.jpg. It was so small I can barely make it out, so I decided I would open it up in a new tab. I thought doing so would expand the picture into a larger resolution, but sadly it didn't. I began to lose interest and closed out of the tabs. I left 4chan and began checking my various social media pages and eventually felt the familiar wave of fatigue hit my exhausted body. I exited out of the browser and was about to shut my MacBook when I saw something. In the dock, I had my downloads, which should have been displayed as a simple folder icon to indicate that it's empty. It wasn't. It was showing that an image had been downloaded. Hag.jpg. Weird, I thought as I dragged it into the trash. I must have been more tired than I thought because I didn't remember downloading the image. I right-clicked the trash icon and tapped on the option to empty it. The operation can't be completed because the item Hag.jpg is in use. I stared at my screen. I was pretty sure it was not in use, but still I double-checked. Any program that could open a JPEG was closed, and I even checked the force quit menu to make sure of it. I began to get concerned. Was this some type of spyware or virus? Is that even possible with a JPEG? I highlighted it and the preview popped up to the right. The image was still small, but it seemed to have gotten bigger than when I had first seen it. Now I can make out what it was. It was a photo of an old lady. Now, this might sound ridiculous, but it creeped me out. It wasn't a witch or a demon lady or anything like that. It was just an old woman, albeit old is an understatement. She was incredibly old, and her eyes were staring right at me. I clicked away and closed my laptop. Brushing away the feeling of unease, I went to bed. That night is when it all started. Subtle at first, but it was enough to let me know something was wrong. I awoke before my alarm had gone off. I wasn't sure what time it was because, well, I couldn't open my eyes. I had to really think if I was actually awake, but after a minute I realized I was. My mind was completely lucid and I was aware of my current physical state. It was not just my eyes I had lost control of, it was my entire body. I tried rolling over, moving my legs, even my fingers, but nothing would work. Now, I was aware of sleep paralysis and its symptoms, but still, I was scared. It was my first time experiencing it. For anyone who's had sleep paralysis, you know how it is. To feel completely helpless and vulnerable, unsure of how long the spell would last before your body would finally snap out of it. The worst part was not the paralysis itself. You see, all my senses were working just fine, including my hearing. I knew because I began to hear things. very light footsteps creaking around my wooden floor. At first I thought it was one of my relatives letting themselves into my apartment, and I was hoping they would wake me up. But after some time I realized whatever it was making that sound was simply just walking around me. At one point it was standing right beside me. I never heard the entity speak or even breathe, but I sensed it right beside my bed. Next thing I know, I was up. I couldn't recall exactly when the paralysis wore off. I couldn't even recall sitting up. Regardless, I was glad it was all over and I was able to shake it off rather quickly. I got out of bed and began my morning routine. Change, eat breakfast, brush my teeth, and check my email. I sat down at my desk and flipped open my laptop and yelped. My wallpaper had been changed to the photo of the old lady. Somehow, Hag.jpg got set as my background. It had gotten even bigger than before. I shuddered and quickly accessed my settings in order to remove it. Switching it back to a generic stock photo, I immediately turned my attention to the trash icon. It showed that I had something in it, and upon checking, I found that it was just as I had left it the night before. Just one item, Hag.jpg. Again, it wouldn't let me empty the trash, saying the file was in use. I got fed up at that point and decided I would restart the laptop in order to make sure everything was closed. No matter how many times I tried, it would not let me fully delete the file. I looked at the time and realized I'd be late for work if I sat there any longer. I decided I'd leave it. I wasn't sure how the wallpaper got changed, but if this file was some type of malware, I figured changing the wallpaper to freak the user out was pretty lame and harmless. I planned to download some sweeper software to remove it when I got home, but just to be safe, I shut it down as opposed to leaving it on sleep mode. After work, I went to the gym and ran some errands, so I arrived home pretty late. After a quick dinner, I got a text from my boss. He told me he had a prospective new freelance client who needed some quick design work done, and they were willing to pay big if they got it in the next couple hours. I didn't have to think twice. The job he described seemed easy, and I headed to my desk, forgetting about the issue I had faced that morning. I popped open my laptop, and within a second, I was backed up to my wall, screaming. The wallpaper had changed again, but this time, so had the photo of the woman. It was still the same woman, but her face, it was different. Her deadpan expression was replaced with one of pure hatred and anger. Even worse, her eyes looked like they were bleeding. I composed myself and took a closer look at the horrific photo. It wasn't blood coming from her eyes. Whatever it was looked too dark to be blood. It was black mascara running down her cheeks, as if she'd been sobbing. I quickly went ahead and changed it. I was not surprised to see I still couldn't delete the photo. Still somewhat shaken, I convinced myself that it was just a prank caused by a malicious file. I quickly finished and submitted the projects I was assigned and made my way to Google in order to find a reliable antivirus application. I found one that had a lot of high ratings and recommendations and promptly installed it. I let the scanning process take place, and after a couple minutes, it displayed a small list of suspicious files. Some I recognized as third-party installations from the torrent sites I used, but I didn't think much of those. Sure enough, among the list was Hag.jpg. I was still surprised that someone was able to make such a persistent form of malware in an image format like JPEG. Nevertheless, I proceeded with the removal process. The interface displayed the time remaining before the cleaning was complete. Less than 10 minutes, enough time to go throw in a load of laundry. I stood from my desk and exited my room. When I returned, my screensaver was up. I shook my mouse to return to the desktop. Can anyone guess what I saw? As you may have predicted, my wallpaper had been changed once again, to the photo of the old woman. At this point, my fear was replaced with anger and frustration. How was this even happening? According to my antivirus software, all the malware files were removed, including Hag.jpg. I checked my trash bin and it was empty, and yet this photo kept making its way to my wallpaper. I used the spotlight feature to do a search of my entire hard drive for the image, thinking it must have copied itself elsewhere to avoid complete deletion. The results came up empty. According to the search, no such file existed. I was furious. The file must have renamed itself in order to make it harder to find, or so I thought. Feeling defeated, I shut the laptop and decided to call it a night. I figured I would have to bring it into Apple to have the file removed, which would end up costing me more than I'd wish to spend. But since I used the laptop for work, I had no choice. I couldn't risk working with a potentially dangerous file that could wipe the hard drive or anything like that. For the next week, this torment continued. Even the, quote, professionals over at Apple couldn't explain the issue. They said they could have the laptop sent in to be looked at, but that it would take a few weeks, and that since it was not covered in the warranty, it would end up costing me an arm and a leg. I couldn't afford it. Not only did the issues persist with my laptop, but the sleep paralysis continued as well. Both were getting worse with every night. Every time I would open my laptop, I saw the face continue to change, the expression always becoming more sinister and hateful than the last. One time I decided to try and let my humor diffuse the fear and tried speaking to it. "Hey Grandma, looking extra sexy this morning if I do say so myself," I chimed. "I see your makeup has been applied immaculately as always." I swear I saw her eyes move to meet mine as I said that. I tried to keep telling myself that it was just in my mind, that the stress from work was getting to me. But that didn't do anything in explaining my experiences while under sleep paralysis. What started out as mere footsteps and the sense that someone was beside me quickly turned to much more. I began hearing heavy, distressed breathing. The breathing became wheezing, and the wheezing became grunting and groaning. The mere sense of someone beside me turned to knowing, without a doubt, I was not alone in my room. I smelled the stale odor of old garments and felt the heat of rancid breath on my face. Every time it happened, I wanted nothing more than to scream, fight, or run away. I couldn't do anything, just lay there, open to whatever insidious intention this frightening entity had in mind. One time, I could have sworn it began whispering in my ear. Through my fear and adrenaline, I could barely make out what the mumbling was, but I could have sworn it was saying, "Mine," and "more." Every morning, I would wake up drenched in sweat with a lingering feeling of dread. But all that can't compare to what I saw and felt last night. Have you ever had a false awakening? Where you dream you are simply waking up and begin going about your mundane morning routine, only to wake once again and realize it was just a dream? The whole thing can really trip you out. I experienced a false awakening with one of the most vivid dreams I can ever recall. In the dream, I woke up, relieved not to have undergone any paralysis. After hopping out of bed, I changed, ate breakfast, brushed my teeth, and went to get my laptop so I could check my email. But when I opened it up, things quickly elevated as any sense of regularity vanished. The desktop had nothing but the wallpaper of the dreaded old woman. She had gotten significantly closer to what would have been the camera and was grimacing with more malevolence than ever before. I moved around the mouse and clicked every key combination I can think of, but nothing changed. I figured I had to restart and move my hand to the power button when it happened. The old woman on the screen spoke. More specifically, she began to scream.
"Don't you dare!"
she shouted, causing me to fall backwards out of my chair and onto the floor. I pushed myself back to the wall and watched the screen in terror and disbelief. The woman began to breathe heavily. I recognized that breathing. It was the same strained wheezing I heard while I was paralyzed. The old woman began pushing her face closer to the screen. With wide, tear-filled eyes, I watched as she reached one arm out of the screen and into the real world. She grabbed at her surroundings and pulled herself through, squeezing like a rodent going through a tiny hole. She slid out and dropped to the floor, slowly rising up. I too got to my feet, but was so scared I couldn't move. I couldn't speak, I couldn't scream. I just stood there with my eyes wide open. With my back against the wall, she began to slowly walk up to me. She stared at me with hollow, menacing eyes before smiling big to reveal her decaying teeth. With a worn, decrepit voice, she spoke.
"You're mine now, child. Part of the family. You will respect and obey me."
I breathed heavily and stammered out, "What do you want?"
"More.
she whispered.
More children for your sweet grandmother. Share me with those you know and love. Grow my family."
I let her words sink in. She wanted me to spread her reign of terror to others, to my friends and family. Upon thinking about putting all those I care about through this torment, I had a brief moment of audacity. The hell I will, you disgusting bitch! I proclaimed, putting my arms to my side and clenching my trembling fists. Her faint smile sank into that scowl I knew all too well. She began to scream and hovered in my direction, too fast for me to defend myself. Before I knew it, she had her hands around me. Sitting on my chest, she began to choke and shake me by the neck. With her mascara running down, dripping on my face, she spoke once again.
This is the second time you've disrespected your sweet, sweet grandmother. I will not tolerate any more of your brutish behavior.
She began violently shaking and choking me until I knew she would kill me. Just then, everything went black. Not because I passed out, but because I had finally woken up. For real this time. I had woken up in the midst of my paralysis, with the feeling of being choked still intact. I still felt the hands of the hag around my neck. Unable to move, I was helpless to stop her. She stopped shaking me and leaned in over to my ear, whispering,
You're mine. Need more.
With that, she let me go, and my body was liberated. I got out of bed, crying profusely, and ran to the bathroom. After vomiting the contents of my already barren stomach, I walked to the sink and rinsed out my mouth. I looked in the mirror, and the tears promptly returned. My eyes were bloodshot, filled with countless busted vessels from the strain of being choked. That wasn't all. I noticed something strange on my face, and after attempting to wipe it off, realized it was mascara. The mascara that had dripped on my face from what I thought was a dream. I'm still not sure what's real and what isn't. My grip on reality is gone. In a matter of days, my oppressor has beaten me into a shell of my former self. My career, social life, and physical health have all deteriorated, but she hasn't broken my spirit. Every night she visits. Every night she tells me to share her image. And every night I refuse. Every night she attacks me. It gets more violent every time. What started as choking has become beating, cutting, and burning. I only have a few marks on my body when I wake up, but I feel everything nonetheless. It doesn't matter what she does. I wouldn't wish this upon anyone, let alone my loved ones. I think she's finally starting to accept that, and I doubt she'll be patient with me any longer. So please, if you're hearing this, heed my warning. I've already accepted my death by the hands of that woman, whatever she is. Don't let me die in vain. Stop searching for hidden and mysterious files on the web before one ends up finding you. And please, for the love of God, if you ever come across Hag.jpg, don't look at it.